Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. Today we'll be focusing on the local and subnational government position for ending plastic pollution ahead of INC4, which is just around the corner. My name is Mukesh Naidu from ICLEI's World Secretariat based in Bonn, Germany, and I'll be moderating the session today. This session is the second of two that we hosted today. The first took place at 9 a.m. Central European Summer Time. So this was to accommodate some of our colleagues in other parts of the world. The webinar is brought to you by ICLEI, the Government of Quebec, the Government of Catalonia, UCLG, UNEP, C40 Cities, Global Cities Hub, Regions 4, UN Habitat, and WWF. The purpose of the webinar is to reconvene as local and subnational governments ahead of INC4, and importantly, get early access to the local and subnational coalition and statement, which is planned to be officially launched on the 22nd of April at Partnerships Day hosted by the Canadian government. The discussion that will take place will form a large part of what specific points that we take forward into the negotiation on behalf of local and subnational governments. Before we get started, we'd like to go through some house rules though. The session is being recorded, and this would allow people who can't attend an opportunity to access the information. There is current and simultaneous translation into Spanish. So to access this, please use the button at the bottom of the screen and toggle to Spanish to activate the feature. We would value and like robust interaction throughout the session, but in order to facilitate this efficiently, if we could please use the raise hand function and or the chat box. At the same time, we request all participants to adhere to our code of conduct for events and webinars. This is being shared in the chat as we speak. Just going through the agenda for the session, I guess we're already touching on the introductions and some introductory remarks. We will then go on to Rachel, who will provide the position statement to us. And Rachel is an international affairs advisor within the International Organizations and Forums Department of the Ministry of International Relations for the Government of Quebec. Under her responsibilities are Quebec collaborations with the FAO, notably the SAGA project, as well as the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, where she represents the Quebec government, as well as the voice of subnational governments under the coordination of the Advisory Committee of Subnational Governments of the CBD. Paul Curry will then take us through a facilitated open discussion. We hope you have a lot to say because we want to hear from you. And Paul is the Director of Urban Systems at ICLEI's Africa Secretariat, taking care of topics that include circularity, food, and water on the African continent for the organization. Cindy Acab will then provide a brief summary of the session, some thoughts, and then highlight the way forward and provide closing remarks. Cindy Acab is the Senior Manager of C40's Waste to Resources Network and Towards Zero Waste Accelerator, where she oversees a network of global cities working towards their zero waste goals. Based in Toronto, Canada, Cindy has over 15 years experience in the areas of circular economy, food waste, and resource recovery. So we have a fantastic lineup planned for you today. At this point, I am going to hand over to Paul for a Zoom shower.
Hey, everybody. So this is one of our favorite sort of ways just to get a broad set of reflections quickly into the room. So what we're going to do is type our reflection on this question into the chat, but don't send it just yet. When I say go, after maybe 30 seconds, once we've had some time, we'll send it, and then there'll be a Zoom storm of responses and perspectives. So whether you are a local or subnational government or working with them, please could you reflect on what is the most important need that you've observed as a local or subnational government related to plastics. So we can type in, and yeah, I'll take 30 seconds to type a reflection to this. I might say devolution of funding for circular practices. So we can take a few seconds to type in a reflection. Okay, how are we doing? Are we feeling like we've got some reflections? So we say 1, 2, 3, go. So we had a storm of 4 so far. Addressing plastic pollution waste is a main challenge. Circular reuse systems, extended producer responsibility, protecting access to flexible plastic straws for persons with disabilities, progress on circular economy approaches, extended producer responsibility. So please do feel free to add further reflections into chat as we go, or any questions you have. I will hand back to Magesh to head into our next discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul, for facilitating that. And please feel free to keep the comments coming on this question and any other points you'd like to raise. It will also be beneficial if you introduce yourselves in the chat. At this point, I hand over to Rachel to take us through the statement.
Thank you very much, Magesh. Can you hear me well?
I can, yes.
Okay, thank you, and I'm very happy to be here this morning or this time of the day for this very important webinar for us. So I'm Rachel, as Magesh mentioned. I work at the government of Quebec. I'll be happy to provide more information about the local and subnational government coalition and its associated statement. But just to start with a bit of a context, which I'm sure we all are well aware, but it's good to remind ourselves why we're here to discuss today. We do have a major problem with plastic pollution. It has become one of the most pressing environmental issues. And while global plastic production has risen exponentially in the last decades to more than 460 million tons per year, only an estimated 9% has been recycled. We know that plastic makes up to 85% of marine debris and are the largest, most damaging and long-lasting type of waste. The chemical they contain affect negatively human health and the environment. I think we're all aware of these facts, but it's important to, it's encouraging to see that it is taking up a step at the international stage as well, because as you might be aware, there's a current negotiation process on plastic pollution that was created with the goal to develop a legally binding instrument that will address the full life cycle of plastic, with a full cycle of INC negotiation with 5 sessions. And we are currently approaching INC4, the 4th negotiating round. It is scheduled to take place from April 23 to 29 in Ottawa, in Canada. And then INC5 will take place in Busan, South Korea in November 2024. And it is expected to be the last round of negotiation before the diplomatic conference that will officially adopt the international instrument. So we, local and subnational government, are on the first line of the plastic pollution crisis. And I'm sure that I speak on behalf of all of us when I say that we're all deeply concerned about already experiencing its effect. We see it very vividly, the impact it has on the environment, our local communities, and we're all here because we want to take action. Although we are aware that addressing plastic pollution is a complex issue, it involves multiple sources, actors, and stakeholders. And we do believe that it requires a whole of government and a whole of society approach in order to deliver effective solutions. This is why during the first month of the INC negotiation, we actively participated to the process, but we saw that our role was not taken into account, so we decided to take action. As I mentioned, local and subnational government representatives have been present since the beginning of INC1, and we've been working separately and all together to strengthen our voice and to present our commitment to end plastic pollution. Therefore, we, local and subnational government, believe we need to be considered as a key partner in the upcoming negotiation, since our role is key to deliver an effective, efficient, and ambitious plastic treaty. This is why we, Quebec, ICLE, Catalonia, UCLG, Global City Hub, C40, and the many, many other partners, we decided to join forces and to work together with our networks and leaders in the local and subnational government to create a global coalition of local and subnational government that, as Magash mentioned, will be launched officially on Partnership Day at the very beginning of the INC4 negotiation. The main instrument of the coalition will be its associated position statement that I'll briefly explain in the next part of my intervention. So the collective goal of the coalition is to engage member states and the INC Secretariat during and after the INC negotiation with a unified voice. As of now, the process is divided between participation of members, the countries, and observers. And there's a very high participation of observers, and we tend to be lost in a pool of many, many participants. So we believe that a coalition will be a way to work as a stronger and single voice. The coalition also seeks to ensure that the future international instrument on plastic pollution has a high ambition to address plastic pollution and also create healthy and thriving communities in line with the principles of just transition and ensuring a sustainable economy. So just to be sure, we're really clear that we're calling on an ambitious plastic treaty, and we want to participate in order to make sure that this ambitious is reflected in the negotiation and in the future text of the instrument. We believe that there are many reasons why local and subnational governments should be key actors in the plastic treaty negotiation. I'll just name a few. We're on the first line of the plastic pollution crisis, and as we mentioned, we're already experiencing its effect. And I'm sure you all have very concrete examples on your own constituencies. We're the closest level of government to the people, and we're experiencing the consequences of heavily plastic pollution firsthand. The vast majority of consumption that result in plastic pollution occurs in urban centers around the world. We're the first to be impacted by plastic pollution, and it has a high impact on the quality of our urban environment. It decreases our cleaning costs, it reduces the efficiency of our infrastructures, it negatively impacts the health of its resident and the natural environment. In many countries, we're also the primary public administration with competencies and budgets on areas directly related to waste, plastic pollution, and just transition. We believe our role is thus crucial to especially for the implementation phase of the instrument, because the implementation of the treaty will fall under our jurisdiction and competency. So this is why we believe it's very important to be present and active within the negotiation of an instrument that will then fall under our responsibility. Because we do have regulatory powers, and responsibility to develop and implement regulation and activities. We also want to focus on the replicating and scaling up. I think I saw a comment on that in the chat, but local and subnational government can effectively contribute to ongoing and new initiatives, replicate and scale up sustainable best practices, successful case studies, and support capacity building of local stakeholders. We see it in the negotiation. There's a strong call to replicate success story, best practices, learn by example, and we do believe we have a role to play in that. We can contribute to the future instrument on plastic pollution ambition by then introducing language based on local best practices, including on just transition, local regulation, recycling, and circular economy initiative. This also includes raising awareness and fostering behavior change among residents and local community, which is something I believe we're all already doing at our own scales. Finally, regarding waste management, any agreement that national governments will approve will, as previously mentioned, have an impact on us. So this is why we created this very concrete call to action that I'll briefly present. So we, local and subnational government, call upon member states to, 1, take ambitious and effective measures to include local and subnational government in the intergovernmental negotiation process, so the INC meetings. 2, ensure that the new legally binding instrument addresses the imbalance that we see in the plastic value chain. 3, recognize the key role of local and subnational government in addressing plastic pollution in the future instrument, and explicitly place that recognition throughout the text and obligation of the plastic treaty, which is currently not well enough reflected in the zero draft. This recognition will enable local and subnational government to support the text and thus the implementation of the instrument, while taking into account financial and other resources that local and subnational government will require. 4, lend support, which can include endorsement to the local and subnational government coalition that we're presenting today. 5, ensure that the established major group and other stakeholder mechanism within the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, is included in the instrument and enabled for any mechanism that follow the ratification of the instrument. And finally, 6, deliver an ambitious international legally binding instrument to put an end to plastic pollution that can be successfully implemented for the benefit of residents, workers, natural environment, and a sustainable economy, and the right of future generations to live on a healthy and sustainable planet. So in summary, because this is a lot of points that are exposed today, why should local and subnational government join this coalition and its effort is to make sure that we have a recognition of local and subnational government as key actors during the instrument negotiation and in the implementation of the instrument. And 2, to include the local and subnational government roles and key consideration in the text of the future instrument. It looks like very simple and easily achievable objective, but do not underestimate how complex and sensible the current negotiations are, and how important it will be for our constituency to remain present and to ensure that the ambitious instrument remain as so until the very end of the negotiation. It is truly important that we are present and that we remind of those objectives to make sure that they are implemented at the very end. So what do you have to do to join the coalition? If you're a local, a subnational, a regional government, a city or municipality, and you want to wish to join the coalition, please send an email expressing your interest. And I believe that there is a lot of information on the slide presented. We'll contact you and let you know all of the information and the current work we're doing and the next step. And in addition, we're also looking to expand the coalition to any other stakeholders. So any partners, any network, any group that would also want to endorse and help with the development of this coalition at all levels of governance as well. So feel free to spread the coalition's voice to any other stakeholder you consider might be interested to join. And finally, in regards of the next step, as Magash has mentioned, we will launch officially the coalition on Partnership Day that will be organized by Canada and WWF before the beginning of the negotiation on April 22nd. We'll have a dedicated session for local and subnational government. And the event is considered as a high-level event. Will open to participation to all of the delegates that will attend the INC4 negotiation. The coalition will be then created, and the statement will be open to support and signatories until from INC4 until INC5. And then we've added our contact information in the slide. Please do not hesitate to contact us if needed. I hope I was able to manage the time because we're really interested into the next part of the webinar to hear you on the coalition. It's an involving process, so we're really looking forward having dialogue and hearing your thoughts, comments, and how you can also help to support this very important work that the coalition is aiming to do. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, and I'll hand it over to you, Magash.
Excellent. Rachel, thank you for that overview on the coalition and statement. So just to reiterate, we shared a link in the chat to the ICLEI Circulars website. We'll share it again now. This link will take you to a short overview of the coalition, and you can find the statement on the same webpage. Rachel alluded to email addresses if you want to reach out to us. We also have a Google form, a link on the same webpage. So if you want a shortcut sign up, please feel free to use this Google form and link. So we won't take questions and answers to Rachel because the next part of the agenda is just this, to have a general discussion so we can raise any questions at the same time. So Paul, over to you, I guess, to lead us in the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Magash. Thanks, Rochelle. Sorry, I'm going to just unspotlight myself so I can see everyone. Please be welcome to turn on your video and join us. It'd be great to hear your voices. So this is an open discussion. So anyway, and anything is sort of welcome into the space and reflection on this. So it'd be great to receive reflections on what Rochelle has presented. If you've gone onto the website and looked at the statement, if you have reflections on that, if you have contributions, critique, things that you think could be added into our negotiating position. So anything that we might say from the floor at the INC4 piece. Any questions around the coalition or its process. And if that's not necessarily your focus area, some reflections on how some of these issues manifest in your jurisdictions and what you're working on would be really wonderful to hear. Pablo, I saw you raised a hand. I don't know if you wanted to intercede or...
Yes, why not, Paul? Thank you very much. I was actually trying to see if the Zoom would recognize my raising my proper hand up because I don't see the reaction to raise my hand. So thank you very much. My name is Pablo Mariani. I work at the UCLG World Secretariat, and I facilitate this group alongside ICLEI, the government of Catalonia and the government of Quebec. I'm very, very happy to see how this coalition is taking shape and how this position paper is gathering this through political support that we need to ensure that this moves forward. I wanted to actually make an offer on the table. Perhaps we need to think how we strengthen the legitimacy and the political representation of this position paper. And we will be putting this paper forward to the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments to ensure our widespread dissemination and that political representation can adhere to this position paper. This will be going out soon. So thank you very much. I hope that this is another building block that will strengthen the coalition when this paper gets circulated. And of course, you can also find me with the rest of the emails now at Magatril Update for any doubts on this. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, very much. So, well, we have a question thrown into chat from Tara. How would you like to be involved in the treaty-making process as local and subnational governments do not have official standing in international law? So I think this is the crux of it. I mean, I think this is part of what we're trying to understand is how best to influence this treaty while it's being formed. So the urgency of this moment, as compared to other advocacy processes that Icli and colleagues are in partnership, such as the biodiversity COP negotiations, the climate COP negotiations, is that this instrument is being built now. If we do not manage to advocate for the inclusion of local and subnational governments in this instrument, we will probably spend the next 5 years, 8 years, arguing that local and subnational governments are important. Whereas if, as happened with the biodiversity and climate journeys, whereas if we can write them in from the start, our advocacy, the arguments that we're going to be making are, how do we better equip local and subnational governments? How do we partner with national governments? And so, Tara, I think you're absolutely right. We don't have an official voice. And so the strategy here is to build a coalition that people will notice and that gives weight, and as Pablo said, the word legitimacy. And in order for us to get wording into these instruments, we need parties, national governments, to sponsor these positions. And so what we were doing in INC3 was paying attention to who were mentioning, which parties were already mentioning local governments or multi-level governance, the whole of government, who we are then able to have informal conversations or more formally give them such a position to say why this is important. And here we need to navigate carefully around what are the core arguments that we're trying to make, because obviously there are larger perspectives about plastics and the broader treaties arguments. But our main argument that we must keep coming back to is local and subnational governments are key in the decision-making and implementation of whatever comes out of this position. So that's our strategy, if that's useful. Rochelle, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Maybe I wanted to add, because I think it's a very important and interesting question. If we can also, add on the example for the government of Quebec. For example, we do have two hats within those negotiations. So we do also participate within, our national delegation within Canada. So I think that it's also important to engage with the members and those that are also the official negotiator and will carry your country voice within the negotiation, because they will be the one that will add weight also to the constituency objective. But there's also another line of advocacy that, Paul presented very well, and that we also need to be there to make sure that while this treaty is in development, the inclusion of the voice of local and subnational government is already reflected, because as of now, it's very interesting to see that it's not only the content of the instrument that is being negotiated, it's also the structure. So as of now, they're advocating for a legally binding instrument, for example. Will it be that in the end? Will it be more of a COP process with example of the Paris Agreement with the NDC, where every country will do a nationally determined contribution? So everything is also in discussion on this statement, but we believe that it's very important to be present. We're noticing that the UN process tends to be more and more inclusive and participating. They see that sometimes involving the party is not enough when it comes to implementation. We need to also have cities, the private sector, the academia, the youth. So I think this will be also a very important element to the success when it comes to implementation of this treaty. So I think I wanted to add those few points. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. I mean, absolutely, that insider for delegations where they are welcoming of subnational voice. I think please do take advantage of that if that's possible. Monica, please come in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the perspective of not waiting for permission to put in a position, but to actually just putting in the position and just establishing the legitimacy there. And thank you so much for sending a draft yesterday. It gave us some time to think about it. I can run through my comments very quickly and then I'll email them to Cindy after. I sent her some yesterday, but I'm thinking about this a little bit more. So I don't want to take up too much time here. Just in terms of quick background for where I'm coming from, in the city of Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada, we have implemented regulations for single-use items and plastics, and we're actually now transitioning those to the provincial and federal regulations. So it shows how local governments do the incubation and then help shape upper level policy in senior governments. And we're a very strong voice for extended producer responsibility. We're extremely fortunate as a city to be in the province of British Columbia with leading edge extended producer responsibility regulations for packaging, deposit refund system for all beverage containers, electronics, tires, and other types of products that contain plastic. And these saved the city of Vancouver tens of millions of dollars in the last decade. So we're very fortunate. In the top section of this statement, I would like to suggest, I like everything that's in here, and I just want to add on it. In terms of why local and subnational governments need to be included, I would suggest that there are financial implications, and that could be more clearly worded, that local and subnational governments face rising costs and pressures to operate outside of core services, and so that the policies must reduce the volume of plastic waste as much as possible, including circular reusable systems, and hold producers responsible for the full cost of their products. I'm a little concerned with how this is worded, that it looks like we're willing to take on a lot more programs and costs, and I think we really need to make sure we put that back on the producers. On that note, why we need to be included is we can shape EPR programs and other plastic pollution regulations with our on-the-ground experience. And we can also, as a third point, provide data. We collect data on waste composition and litter audits, and those can be used to support the development of subnational and national policies. And in terms of the calls for action, I would like to add sort of as a 3B or after number 3, recognizing the need to avoid burdening local governments with additional costs by holding producers responsible for the cost of reducing and managing their end-of-life products. And I've got some points we could add around why we need to recognize the points, like what EPR programs can do. And that's probably a key point. And then just also strengthening the reuse systems as well as part of that, I think would be really great to see. And then I'd mentioned in the chat, just acknowledging the need for accessibility. That may not be the right place, but we can advocate for persons with disabilities and the need to protect some plastic products like flexible plastic straws. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Monica. I mean, that's fabulous, and I think really looking forward to receiving the written inputs as well. If I can ask a clarification question, I mean, I think that the point of having to take on yet another unfunded mandate beyond the scope, and interpret that, your remark of having producers cover the cost, is that a remark about getting new funds or funding waves into your government systems, or is it having them take that specific role, that service?
I think it
just to add context, an argument we are making is you're going to devolve if you're going to decentralize a specific responsibility, you have to devolve the funds with that. And I think that's the argument we stay with. Is it along those lines or a separate piece? Probably
and both. So in my preference, and just in our experience, like the city of Vancouver, we were able to divest our curbside recycling program over to the producer responsibility program to provide direct operation. And so our taxpayers no longer fund or subsidize any part of that program. However, that's a big transition, and some municipalities prefer to operate it as a contractor to the recycling, the EPR program. So they get funds to offset those, to pay for their costs. Some may get it all covered, or they get a portion. So I think, so that we don't divide local governments, the option of flexibility is really important. There are some products that could be completely operated outside, like a deposit refund system for beverage containers or for electronics or something like that. But still, there can be a role. I want to recognize that for local governments to provide some collection. And so it just needs to, I think I can provide wording, suggested wording to be, you know, taking on the responsibility and providing the option of completely taking over the operation and all responsibility for all costs, and or subsidizing. Like there's some cases where it makes sense. But thanks for that.
Thank you. I see Samuel's hand and I saw Mitch's hand. If you want to come in after.
Hey, my name's Sam. I'm from Friends of the Earth International. We're a civil society organization in 73 countries with 5,000 local groups. And I was just wondering about what you see the partnership with civil society in terms of getting, we've worked with the climate local government initiatives or parliamentarian initiatives and other international treaty kind of initiatives similar to this one. Potentially our role in the past has been to work, you know, we work with, our members work with and groups work with lots of local governments to get people to sign up. But do you see other roles for civil society in this process? And then if you just had any reflections on governance as well. I'm working with a parliamentarian who's interested to start up a parliamentarian network, quite similar to what you're doing here. But yeah, if you had any advice for a parliamentary network setting up and maybe to talk a bit about your governance kind of structure.
Thanks. I might see if there's a partner on board to see it to. I mean, I think in short, we need to align efforts and amplify each other's messages. What we want to be careful of is the more messages you invite, the more you dilute the one argument for this position. And so I think there's certainly so much space for collaboration across different coalitions. And I think those will take on the form as needed. Colleagues, I don't know if there's someone who wants to add to that or reflect on the parliamentarian or governance approach.
Yes, I can add on that. And yeah, I think that as we mentioned in our presentation of the statement, we're also looking for collaboration with other partners other than local and subnational governments. So other involved stakeholders, civil society, and so on. It's one of the objectives. And regarding the other coalition, I think that we do see that there's a few other coalition, and we did say that there was a parliamentary network. So I think it's worthwhile to engage with them and see how we can mutually reinforce our common position. So we don't see it as a difficulty. I think it could be something interesting, and to see how sometimes we can mutually reinforce our point. And we do see it, for example, in the biodiversity negotiation where I come from. At the very beginning, for example, there was a group working especially on cities, and then another one on subnational government. And so we were doing, dual advocacy work and different things, and it worked really well. But then at the very end, we decided to unite our forces. And when we had joint message, then we would push them together and it would be reinforced. And when we had something different to do, then we could do our own advocacy work. So I think that there's a way we can work around within a negotiating context.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. Mitch, do you want to come in?
Sure. Actually, well, I was listening to Monica from Vancouver. I was just nodding my head because everything that she was saying are the things that I would have said. It makes all the sense in the world to advocate for the changes that we are in. I appreciate your statement, but a very strong consideration for the burden that falls on local governments and how we can mitigate that to the extent possible. Sorry, I'm the mayor of La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm also president and national co-chair of MRCTI, Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. And so to the extent that we can focus on EPR as a way to ensure that local governments are not bearing the cost in any kind of way for the cleanup of their mess, that is critical from our perspective, my perspective and our perspective. So just wanted to emphasize that, and she stole all of the thunder that I was going to bring. So thank you for that. It is and that's really that. I think that's the only thing. I mean, just to put this in context, obviously, in the United States, we're not maybe quite at the level of progression in dealing with plastics that the folks in Vancouver are. But we are, you know, with the Mississippi River, the basin is massive and drains a big chunk of the United States of America. I would say that we're probably responsible for a major chunk of all the plastics that you're seeing around the globe. And so it is, and we don't have the federal will, let's just say right now, to do this as a nation. And so we're grasping, trying to find any way to do this. So any statement that that is really focuses on the producers as opposed to local governments would be ideal. And that's it. So appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's always wonderful to hear these cross validations from others. I mean, I think this fits in very much to a narrative that we're hearing when we have convenings of mayors around the world. You know, national government sets policy in an acontextual manner, and then there's this assumption that local government will implement or be able to, or have the resources to do so. So that, I mean, that's a central reason to getting these written into the instrument at the beginning, is to acknowledge that this is going to create a burden and to ask those questions about who's funding it. So thank you very much for the additions and the validation. Colleagues, further inputs from the floor? Great to hear further voices. Do you agree with what you're hearing? Slight contextual differences. How is this showing up in your jurisdictions?
This is Annette from Toronto. Again, I also support everything that Monica had mentioned in terms of the municipal role. I also just wanted to add that from a water and wastewater perspective, you know, good data there, but that's also likely contributing to public health, you know, and the more these enter the water and wastewater streams, then there's a cost there, not only to municipalities to manage that kind of waste stream outside of like litter or garbage or recycling, but also, you know, what does that mean from a public health standpoint? So, you know, this would vary in terms of the level of sophistication from municipality to other jurisdictions and how they manage their water for drinking for people. So I think that might be a perspective, is that, you know, it's difficult for local governments or regions to provide safe water as well, if it's going to.
Thanks, Annette. I think you've added in the layering of water and wastewater and the additional data that could be used.
Well, there's also a question in the chat by Zen Vickett on how will the coalition build the consensus to take a position beyond what is in the statement, and maybe if I can jumpstart on that, because I think it's a very important question to address. This is why, you know, when we presented the statement in the coalition, we want to have a very macro level and a very you know, goal, like broad goal objective oriented coalition and statement to make sure that enough people are able to endorse and join and have a consensus within the statement. And because I think that if we all start also to add a lot of very detailed, then we can fear to lose the consensus of the text. And then we will be interesting to hear your thought on how to also contribute at a technical level on the negotiation, for example, and what we did in again, I'm taking a biodiversity example, when we had a similar declaration to make sure that local and subnational government were included within the new Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework. The declaration was very broad, but then ahead of every negotiation meeting, we would also prepare a more of a technical position within the negotiation where we could address those kind of technicalities without burdening too much the declaration text. So we make sure it is broad enough. And this is also the work that we've been engagingly doing on a bilateral level. So within our own national government or at a different level. So those can be things that can be arranged to make sure that the coalition doesn't become too technical and then people are not able to join, although they do want to support local and national government inclusion in the coalition. So I do hope it's a helpful clarification.
Diane, does that answer your thoughts?
Unfortunately, she was frozen for a lot of the presentation. So I caught, there was a chunk in the middle that I didn't get, and I'm not sure how much there was.
I'm sorry, internet troubles around the world at the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe we can.
So I guess just
yeah,
to try and take
go
it
for it.
forward is it just so I think this what she did say about it being high level and broad was really useful, but I wasn't clear how the technical aspects. So when we're talking about the high ambition part, which I think all local governments agree with, but I'm not sure we would agree with what high ambition means. And so I guess I probably missed that part in Rachel's discussion, but if she could just say how that would be handled.
Michelle?
Yes, I can try to jump in again. Apologies for the internet issue, but yeah, I think that when it comes to more of the technical position, this is the part when we can also try to work on a closer level with the national government at the national focal point, also engaging, for example, for us at the Canadian level, to make sure that all of those technicalities are well included. And I was also referring to an example of what we did into the biodiversity negotiation, because we had a similar declaration. Everything that was technical was prepared more on a position paper ahead of every negotiation. So it was not included into the coalition and the declaration. It was something prepared before every negotiation meeting, because as you're mentioning, the goal of the coalition is to be on a broader level.
So then each government can respond and agree to move forward with the technical aspect if they feel comfortable, and just stay at the high level if they don't. Yeah. Exactly. Because it can take a while for those sorts of permissions to work through a provincial government, I think.
No, definitely. And we're also aware that, it's a global coalition. So it's local and subnational government around the world. So of course, the local context is very different from one, constituency to another. So we need to take that into consideration as well.
Thanks both for the clarifications. Let's hear from Caitlin and then Clara.
Good morning. Thank you, Rachel and Paul, just for this, just the incredible effort and for organizing this, both the statement and the webinar. Just clarifying question back. That was started with the question in the chat regarding the involvement of this coalition in the treaty negotiation process. And so back, and Rachel, you've spoken to this as far as, having the formal, more technical position papers as a coalition, but moving forward, but also then how do we have a unified message within, our national delegations, or how do we influence others? So I understand that piece. My question regarding the draft language regarding shaping the instrument is that just hasn't been addressed yet. Is the vision then the formal observer status, just more of that? What is the mechanism, envisioned, and whether we should reflect that in the final statement?
Thanks so much. I think Rachel sort of reflected on that earlier. That's a lot of the shape of what this is going to be still being negotiated. And so I think as those emerge, we're going to do our best to provide inputs or nudge there. What I think we're hoping is that this coalition sets us instead in good standing, so that whatever mechanism comes to receive constituency voice, we already have a group of people brought together who fit into that grouping quite well. And so there's a bit of a feeble response, I think, to yours, because I think we're still waiting to see what emerges. But the arguments and the side conversations around what might emerge in the future are going to say, well, we need a clear mechanism to represent constituencies, as with major groups and other UNEP processes, as with the LGMA equivalent in the climate COPs, and the biodiversity COPs as well. Yeah. Clara?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Or afternoon, wherever everybody is. This is Clara Vazex from Carry Cycle. So we're working along with OPC at the state of California to hopefully join this coalition, and yeah, very excited about the whole process. I just had a more, I guess, process question throughout INC4. Apart from the launching of the coalition, is the objective to also be part of certain discussions after April 22nd, or will there be just more of an internal work within the partners of the coalition for INC5?
Thank you so much. So the coalition will be formally launched. So here we're having our informal conversation. Will be formally launched on Partnerships Day on the 22nd. A number of us and colleagues will be present in the negotiating rooms. Our role there is really just to be listening really deeply to who, which parties are saying what about cities, local government, subnational government, and having as many informal conversations with them to understand what their positions are and whether they could be sponsors of this position and feed this in. Because anything that we say as observers is heard in the room, but not recorded as effectively as anything that parties put in. And so the main need for this coalition is to find one or two champion parties who are very keen to take this and make this something that they want to negotiate for. And so from INC3, we were listening, and there were about 3 or 4 parties who referred to the important role of local and subnational government. The Philippines was the most direct about the role and responsibility with regards to waste management, but others referring to remarks around EPR and others. And we've begun building some relationships. And so each of the partners in this coalition would be, so to speak, responsible for a set of relationships that they would pursue, either their own national governments and advocate internally for their national government negotiators to put forward the arguments that are put in our statement, but then also people we meet who are in the negotiating room. And so the work between INC4 and 5 is building this movement, bringing more local and subnational governments into this coalition, but also following up on those relationships. So if another party brings forward something that sounds like they're amenable to multi-level governance, whole of government approaches, constituency representation, things like that, then those are people to build a relationship and see if they will join and sponsor it. Does that clarify or help?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's definitely a lot of work to do between INC4 and INC5. I think I was just trying to understand more short term during INC4 if there's any other discussion, but it sounds like there'll be more of a side informal discussion, potential side informal discussion happening after the launch of the coalition, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, and we're able to put in, and we have to be strategic about how many statements from the floor we put in, so that they're impactful. But we would likely put in 1 or 2 that would draw attention to this. And typically, how we do it is the opening would draw attention to the statement, and the closing would appreciate any parties that have emphasized points that we agree with. And then finally, just a note which is very exciting to see in a way. There is already 1 paragraph referring to subnational governments in the draft text. It is very much related to waste management, so not a full design or life cycle perspective, but it does talk about technical and financial resources being given to subnationals. It's fully bracketed, which means in the negotiations it could be fully removed, or it could be accepted. And that feels like a good space to be entering in the 4th round, because we'll see how people react to that specific statement and what the feeling is, if they care at all. If they don't care too much, then push for more. If it's a point of contention, then we have conversations to address that. I'd like to welcome maybe 1 or 2 further inputs before we close. If there's some pressing thoughts to add, strong feelings about process or to share what you're working on in your jurisdictions? Or at this stage, we feel like we've said what we need to say and we can close.
I think everybody's keeping some for INC4, some energy for INC4.
Fabulous. So thanks so much. I mean, of course, this is an informal and a first conversation. These will continue, and please do reach out for further information. Please do send us further, more detailed comments if you would like via email. Those would be really appreciated. I'll hand back to you, Magesh.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. And thank you to everybody for the robust discussion. It is quite encouraging to see this because a lot of effort has gone in to the coalition, the statement, and pulling this webinar together by all of the partners. So this just further energizes us. So thank you for the inputs. I'd like to hand over now to Cindy ACAB to maybe provide some thoughts on what you've heard, Cindy, provide a way forward, and then deliver some closing remarks.
Great, thank you for that. And thank you everyone for the discussion. It's been really interesting. I think from my perspective, what I've heard is there most definitely is a need for a united voice for local and subnational governments. And we've heard and we've seen that cities are already leading the way in this area of plastics and single-use plastics. They're already taking action in their communities and with their constituencies that are seeing results. Some of the things I heard in terms of the coalition that I just wanted to reflect in terms of, because this is a newer coalition that's being launched at this point in time, moving forward through the rest of the negotiation process. And I think we've already seen other communities approach this issue in a similar way, other communities that don't necessarily have standing as part of the negotiations, but we've seen the scientific community come together as part of a coalition, and also the business community as well, as a way to elevate their voice and present what positions are most important to them in terms of the treaty. So I'm very glad to see the same thing moving forward for our local governments and subnational governments as well. Just a few other points I heard. There's also a need going forward in terms of the position statement to recognize the need for accessibility. And what this means in terms of a financial burden or financial position for cities. And EPR could be the way to really clarify that role, that the text could also clarify a focus on EPR as a way forward to manage costs for cities. And that there's also an interesting perspective in terms of public health, not necessarily just related to waste for cities in terms of water and wastewater and the role that cities have to play in terms of public health and single-use plastics. So those were some of the key overview highlights of what I've heard. I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you, first of all, to the government of Catalonia for arranging for a Spanish interpretation for this session. I'd also like to thank Rochelle for walking us through the position statement. And a big thank you to Magesh and Paul for organizing the webinar and facilitating this session for all of us on the call. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today and for sharing your thoughts and for your comments and how we can strengthen the position statement and how we can move forward and make this coalition really a successful one as we move forward to INC4 coming up in Ottawa. I would just like you to please take the time to read the statement, provide any comments or any further comments that you have. Please feel free to spread the word, share the statement with your colleagues. And again, if you're interested in signing, the link has been shared in the chat as well. And with that, I will pass things back to Magesh.
Perfect. Cindy, thank you very much for those words and closing remarks. So on that note, we'd like to wish everybody a good rest of day. Please stay in touch and look forward to seeing you at INC4 and 5. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.